in. So Dr. Page works in the field of human-computer interaction. This is a really cool field. Her current research topics include privacy, social media, the Internet of Things, technology adoption and non-use, individual development and cultural differences, values in design, supporting vulnerable populations such as users on the autism spectrum, ethical research practices, human algorithm interaction, computer-mediated communication, and computer-supported cooperative work. Dr. Page holds a Ph.D. in information and computer science with concentration in informatics from University of California, Irvine, and a Bachelor's of Science and a Master's in computer science, specialization in human-computer interaction from Stanford University. Her research has been funded by the National Science Foundation, Facebook, Disney Research, Samsung, and Yahoo Labs. She holds editorial positions and publishes in her field's top conferences and journals. Dr. Page has also spent several years working in the information risk industry, leading interaction design as a product manager. So with all that, Dr. Page is also my personal graduate advisor. She's amazing. She has high energy and it's awesome. Every time we talk to her, she's just going. So I'm excited that you're all here to learn from her. So Dr. Page, we'll turn it over for you and we'll keep the last 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. If you guys have questions while she's talking, go ahead and put it in the chat so we can all read it.
Great. It's funny. I could say the same for you, Spring. Super high energy. We're a good match. So thank you so much, everybody. In fact, I would love for you to put questions in the chat because I want to make this relevant, and I have, a million things I could talk about, I'm sure. But if there's specific things you're struggling with or questions you have, I absolutely want to make sure we get to those. So it might be best for me to just first start off with a bit of an intro on how I got here. I realized I was talking to Jordan earlier about, what the interests might be in this group, and, being a good graduate student, obviously everyone's trying to do that, but then how do you actually integrate the gospel, or what is the role of the gospel and in your graduate studies? And so anyway, I'll make sure I touch on that. So my path here is that, first of all, I'm a convert to the church. I joined when I was halfway through getting my master's at Stanford. And so I kind of have a dual perspective, both trying super hard in grad school and trying to make progress from a very secular point of view. And I was telling them earlier that at Stanford, it was always go, 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 right? And my roommate and I had to schedule once a quarter a lunch so that we could see each other. And, it was that kind of life. And I think, and I come from a very an atheist type background. So personally, that was my perspective before I encountered the gospel. And so, a very different perspective where it's very much like, I need to make this happen and I need to make sure that I work like crazy to be successful, right? And then of course, in the world, the way you're successful is to be, super rich or have some super powerful position, or, that's kind of the way I saw the world before I found out about the gospel. And so I'm going to offer kind of a contrast between that perspective and then once I joined the church, how that changed my studies. And in fact, I think it really changed for the better because, so we were talking about this earlier, how really, there really is no end to how much money you can get or how much better you can get, or if you're a world record holder in a few years, someone else is going to shatter that, right? It's you're never going to be the very best forever. And if you use that as a metric. And, when I was at Stanford, that was the mentality for me to try to be the very best. And my students in spring can probably tell you that, I try to curb my perfectionistic tendencies or my strive for excellence. Like I want them to strive for excellence, but now with a more gospel-centered, lens, I realized that, you could go, you could work yourself to the bone. Most of my colleagues on tenure track when they were, a lot of them have tenure now, but on tenure track, they were just working constantly 7 days a week, 14 hours, if not more a day. Like it's just, you could do that and work yourself to death and get a ton of publications and do really well. But you have to think about this as a marathon, a lifelong marathon. And I do have several colleagues who are like, I ruined my health to get tenure. This happened, or, you hear about families and just sort of, just all the things that can happen when, you don't really focus on what's important. And so I think, having that gospel perspective is not only let's try to get that into our grad studies. It's actually the thing that can make this doable. It's a marathon. It is a long-term game, I guess, kind of a game. It is definitely a long-term plan. And it has to be something that sustains you and keeps you going, even when you are 40, 50, however old. In fact, professors have sort of this way of sticking around. They're 70, they're still doing research. And it's because we love what we do, but you can't do it if it's not sustainable, right? And so, I have to say, just a little bit of the secular background. I was basically somebody who I went to Stanford thinking I was going to be constitutional law or social science. Obviously, I did not end up in that area. I went computer science. But what I loved about it was that the way that Stanford was structured, you didn't have to declare what your major would be or apply to an engineering school or a certain program. And as I understand, BYU is similar until, you apply maybe the second year into some of these programs, which is great because that allowed me to explore. And I actually just took computer science as a general education requirement because I didn't want to take another natural or physical science. And so I went ahead and nothing against that, just me personally, and so I went ahead and I took that and it was like, wow, this is amazing. I love coding. I love creating things, and it just really drew me to it. So anyway, I did that. I ended up being a computer science major for my undergrad. I stayed for my master's. And then the point at which I actually found the church, I was going like a million miles a minute. So I directed an a cappella group there as well and was like making albums and like doing just all sorts of stuff. And I know Spring's like, what? You never said. I had, there were a whole bunch of other things going on. I was involved with all sorts of activities. Tell the lab, do not make me sing. It's a recording voice. There's a reason why it's recording. I don't have that choir type voice, no projecting going on. So anyway, I was trying to excel at everything I did, but, it just got to the point where it was like, what is going on? Or, I would go out to parties with my friends and, that the parties at Stanford are kind of like what you might expect at, a school that has a reputation for working hard and partying hard. And basically I was like, okay, well, it's starting to get all kind of the same. And, in terms of working hard, I'm, trying to get like every award I can for, whatever I end up pursuing. But you know what? There's like really no end to this. Like I could just go on and on. If I get an award, well, the next year I need to work harder to get an award and, beat out the competition again. And so it just ended up being this sort of like, what is going on in life? Like, why, like, what am I after? Because going down this route is not going to get me to, like, I won't ever have an end point. I'm just going to keep going and being exhausted and trying my hardest at everything and still not being the best. Right. So that was the context in which I actually discovered the gospel. Actually, a friend of mine who was Catholic, and she just, I don't know how it happened, but she talked to me one day and was like, hey, do you want to come to church with me? And that was actually the first time I'd ever been invited to any kind of church at all. I grew up in the Bay Area. So, it's politically, social ideology, opposite end of the spectrum from, what the church teaches. But, and very much like religion was something that people didn't want to talk about or was kind of taboo. And so I was like, sure, I was really curious because all I knew about church was what I saw in movies, and that you go to this big building with pews, right? And I literally didn't actually know who Jesus was either. I know it sounds crazy, but I did not know. I just knew it was a swear word, right? And so basically, I went and I really felt the Spirit, and really just, it was like, wow, they were talking about, I think it was the Good Samaritan and the woman at the well. And, I really realized, oh, wow, relationships, people matter. It's not just, what you attain, it's the people. I know that sounds probably, crazy, given this audience. Everyone's like grown up. If you've grown up in the church, you're kind of like, oh yeah, of course people matter, right? But it was my first realization that, what, it really matters, the people in your life and developing those relationships. And then, I started going to a whole bunch of other churches. I think once all my friends realized, oh, she went to a church with someone, they just all started inviting me to their churches, right? So I kind of was visiting churches every week. And I got to the point where at one point, one of my good friends said, oh, my friend has a really great church, and it's a really cool church. He just got back from a mission, you should talk to him. Okay. So of course that was, our church. And at that point, that was when I realized really that I could do everything I wanted to do, like constantly, in terms of like worldly success. But really it wasn't going to get me the satisfaction or happiness that actually comes when you focus on the things that matter. Now I won't go through my whole conversion story, but it was a turning point for me where I realized, what matters is who you are, the person you become. In fact, even my dad, so my parents, they were not excited about me joining the church. My mom cried when I told her I was going to be baptized. But a month later, my dad goes up to me, he's like, I actually think this church thing's good for you. Because I think it changed who I was just as a person and my values. And he could see it in that short amount of time. And so, I realized why we're here is to develop who we are, to get experiences so we can handle, and tackle hard challenges, so we can help one another, so we can teach, right? Teach our children, teach others. And I realized also that, with grad school and what I was doing there, what really mattered was that I tried to do things that were worthwhile, that were helping others. And so I ended up being drawn to the field of human-computer interaction because it's a field of understanding how technologies and people interact, and then how to make it more useful, more usable. Now, the big thing is more ethical. A lot of my research, I look at social media, privacy. So obviously a really hot area in terms of those concepts. And, it really changed my perspective on what I should be focused on and what I should spend my time on. So, for me, that sense of, and in fact, I ended up, so I got married 9 months later, had our first kid and graduated with my master's a month before that. So my parents were just like, what is going on, right? And so, and so I decided, because I didn't have a topic I was really passionate about researching, and I just really enjoyed making products usable and useful. I went to industry while my husband went to school. So anyone with questions about this whole, how do you make it work when there's two of you? We've done a lot of swapping back and forth with one person working, one person in school. And so I was in industry for 5 years while he was going to school, like doing night school. And then I would work during the day and did a swap and with the kids and everything. But, when I was working in industry, I worked on an information risk product, and it was very much, it's a really useful problem, right? Helping people who work with documents figure out where's the latest version. How do we coordinate? If someone edited this document, did they edit off the latest? Did they edit off of an older version? Which version did it come off of? So, these types of information management type issues, which are super important and definitely important for businesses. But at one point, I realized that all these technologies were shaping our world. And I had coworker who complained about his son, his 16-year-old, who had his cell phone and it was always on and going off all night and he wouldn't turn it off. This is definitely a start of FOMO. And it was like, what is going on? Why won't you turn this off? And his son would come down and complain and be exhausted in the morning. And he'd say, okay, well, why don't you just turn your phone off? And he's like, no, I'm going to miss out on something. Right. And so his son knew that like he couldn't go on and it was exhausting him and it wasn't good. But at the same time, he also couldn't disconnect. And I realized, my kids were like 5 and 2 at this point. And I was like, I need to study what's going on. We have these technologies out there that are shaping how we feel, shaping how our expectations as a society. And, no one is out there studying this or doing anything about it. And so I just realized, I need to figure out what kind of world are my children going to grow up in? Are they going to be kind of addicted to these technologies? Are they, how are they going to be interacting with others? And then of course, the minor detail that I, left out was, it was that plus my like patriarchal blessing literally told me to go and get a higher education and stuff that led me to go back and get my PhD. Otherwise, I don't think I would have had that on my radar. And I went back and studied this, and that's been my passion because I feel like focusing on the things that are important, especially using the gospel to center that, right? What I thought was important before was really different, before I joined the church than after I joined the church. And I realized, helping others, helping us, developing who we are as people, that is actually the goal of us being on earth. And I think that really shaped my idea of what problems are important to solve and tackle. And so I went back to grad school and I did, research all sorts of things about social media, privacy. I do just a lot on the area of technology adoption, as well as non-users and those who have maybe difficulty, such as those on the autism spectrum, where, they can actually encounter, there's a lot of phishing going on and a lot of them being tricked into, either financially, sending money to people, or unfortunately, sexually abused or physically abused offline because, they're meeting people who they shouldn't be meeting. And so a lot of my research really focuses on helping folks. And I realize technology is such a huge enabler. It enables a lot of amazing things, but it also enables a lot of really, unfortunate negative consequences as well. So, that's kind of basically how I got to where I am. And I think in terms of, other principles beyond just like the focus of my graduate work and now, my professional work, I also, really a lot of the principles of the gospel, sometimes I feel like it might seem, oh, okay, not working on Sundays. Like, I just don't have time not to work on Sundays, right? I need to get this done. I need to, there's so much work. But I found that actually following the principles, it's a long-term game and it ends up helping. So just an example, when I was doing my PhD, I had a reading list. So I was at UC Irvine, and the way we have our qualifications is not only am I going to write a paper and present some research that I did to qualify to be a PhD candidate, I also have a reading list that is all of the core readings I need to read for this area. Now, my advisor, and I think he just really, he had a lot more faith in me and confidence in me than, I probably did in myself. Because I think coming from industry, he was like, oh, she's on top of things. She'll be able to get things done. So he tells me the semester before, you should go up for your, you should go up and defend and, go for your candidacy. And so I have, basically, and we're on the quarter system in the UCs, at least at UC Irvine. So I had, I guess that's 10 weeks to go and read like a 50 book / article long, list of all the seminal works in my area. And I was like, and of course I had, when I started grad school, I had 2 kids already. So they were 5 and 2 at that point. And so, like I'm doing the whole, my husband's working full time. I'm, I get to the blessing of being at home with my kids. and, trying to study and get my doctorate at the same time. And I need to read in one quarter, this 50 book slash article long list. And so I was like, there's literally no physical way this can happen. I don't have I can't find the number of hours. And of course, that's on top of classes, right? And I ended up just being like, okay, you know what? I am going to go and just Sabbath day, I'm not going to work on Sundays, but the rest of the time I'm kind of going full force. And I ended up being able to get through that. Like, it was incredible. I read books in like 2 days, like that, just, in between like picking kids up from kindergarten. And those of you who have kids, especially in kindergarten, realize that's like 2 hours a day. Like, it is not even they shouldn't even call it school yet. And so, there was very little time. But somehow I was able to get through it. And then Sundays, I would be like sleeping in super late and then resting and enjoying time with my family. And it was fantastic. And I think I needed that time to rejuvenate, right? Like I said, it's really like a marathon where it's a long-term gain. And yes, you could spend a semester, maybe even a year, just plowing through and trying super hard to get in all the time you can to finish everything you need to, but literally, you're going to be burned out at the end of that year. And so I think a lot of the principles of the gospel actually help us without us even realizing. For me, it was a restriction. I was like, oh, I've joined the church and now I can't work on Sundays, and but instead it ended up being a huge blessing and I also can testify that just somehow, he enables you to do these things. Like when you're following those really basic things, even just like saying my prayers in the morning, if I like say my personal prayers, thoughts will come to my mind that have nothing to do with, what I'm saying in my prayer. And it'll just be like, oh, you need to do this. And it'll just be a thought that pops to mind. And then, it ends up actually reminding me of the things that are important. And I just think, the more you can bring the Spirit in your life, the more you can have direction. And because the other issue is we all actually are kind of type A in a way. Like you would not be in grad school if you didn't care about the quality of your work. And so I think the hard part about that is that you're the one who actually says, okay, this is good enough, this is not good enough. For most of your work, right? You're the one who is going in and being your own boss in that way. And that's hard for everybody, in academia, because we all want to be very good and, we all have some perfectionistic tendencies. And so it makes it really hard to just kind of dial down and be like, okay, this is good enough. And so I think a lot of it is you can always fill your time and do as much as you want. And, there's always stuff that is important to do. However, I think grad school is a matter of prioritizing and prioritizing, what do I really have to get done? Like for me, a lot of students took on side projects and different research that they thought was really interesting. I was like, no, I'm a mom. I have young kids. I'm, trying to do grad school while my husband's working. I can only work on research related to my thesis. And that's what I did. And I think you have to start prioritizing. And I think also it helps when you have like, oh, Sundays are totally out. Well, that gives me less time. Let me prioritize. I think it helps you refocus and think, okay, well, I actually only have this amount of time. What is really important to get done? Let me go in and try to, cull out the things that I thought were so important, but, in the end, we're not so. And, I've done that too, where basically there have been submissions where I went ahead and I was like, okay, this is a major conference. I really need to publish this. And, I need to do everything I can and stay up all night to, work on this. Right. And, I still have these tendencies. But then in the end, when it comes down to it, I actually have a heart condition. And so I actually am super grateful. It's this weird thing where I am so grateful actually to have this heart condition and to have some limitations, because I think me personally, I would just go until I probably burned out. Right. But because of that, it's been a blessing, because at certain points, I'm like, I have to go to bed, because if I don't, my heart condition, kicks in. And I have been to the ER a few times because I went ahead and worked more, didn't sleep. So that my triggers are not sleeping enough, caffeine, and lack of like stress, not really compatible with this job, but that's okay. I think it's been a blessing that actually those are my triggers, because it makes me have to actually dial down and say, okay, no, I need to go to bed, or no, I'm just not submitting this paper. Like, I know this was a major deadline and this was our major conference and it's super important. We only have, the next year before we'll be able to submit here. But you know what? My health comes first. And I think, I think that needs to happen a lot of times. And whether it's forced for me, physically, or just in terms of the gospel, allowing you to prioritize so that you can keep this up and keep running this marathon, long term. So yeah, and I guess one more experience I wanted to share was, again, like, I feel like there's so many things where when I'm doing the right things, somehow to me, it's magic. I'm sure me being a computer scientist, I kind of have this theory that, everything is like actually run by algorithms, and it's, these fantastic people who know what they're doing, who are like helping to oversee it. But anyway, like I feel like when I do the right thing, somehow other things fall into place, like magically, right? And basically, I remember there was one time when I was doing my doctorate, like I would go to the temple every month, and of course, where we live, that was a huge blessing. So I was in California for that. And usually you don't have a temple like right near you so that you could go there. But, I had a temple close enough that I was like, okay, I'm able to go every month. This is fantastic. And then one month I showed up and the temple was closed for cleaning. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, and it was closed for the rest of the month. So I'm like, okay, well, I didn't check and there's nothing I can do, right? It's closed for cleaning. And so I didn't end up being able to go in the temple that month, but I'm like, I tried, and I did everything I could. And this is how I know that, going to the temple, and they always talk about, like, temple workers always talk about how much help you're actually getting when you go to the temple from behind the veil that we don't even realize. And they always say, if they had known, they would be going so often. And I know that's true, because that month, everything in my research just fell apart. It'd been great for the past year or two. And then just everything, my hypothesized research questions and everything, we did the analysis, nothing was working out. Everything was just completely falling apart. And I was like, what is going on? And literally the next month, I was able to go back to the temple. And as soon as I went to the temple, the next day, a new avenue came about. Like, we realized, oh, you know what? This might be happening. And we hypothesized, a few different research questions, and then we tested them out, and it worked like fantastic. And it literally was a very close correlation with, my whole not going to the temple part. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And it went on to be something that was published at a top conference, nominated for a best paper, and it was even way better than the original direction I had gone in. And I'm not saying this as if you showed up to the temple and it's closed, it's your fault. But I literally think we try the best we can. And then when we do the things that we know we should be doing, we get that extra help, and I'm like, I must have been getting so much extra help for, that year or two. And then all of a sudden I just, unfortunately, not intentionally, but I wasn't able to access that extra help for that month, and everything fell apart. And then bam, when I was able to go back, everything was like even better. And so I've had so many experiences like that, where I just think, there is so much more going on, and so much more help we're getting by doing the simple things that our Heavenly Father asks us to do, that I wouldn't be able to survive this job or have finished my degree without the gospel. I'm pretty convinced of that. I would have run myself to the ground. I would be just burnt out, and I would definitely not be here. And so I'll pause there and see if there's some questions in the chat. And feel free to speak up too. You don't have to be on silent either. It's nice to hear some voices sometimes. Okay, how do you, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you got it. I just was going to read it. How do you
Yeah.
use it in your research? to change the way you raise your children in regards to technology, i.e. time spent on media entertainment or an age you want them to get a phone, etc.?
Right. Yeah. A lot of people ask me that because, I study social media. And yes, I have to say my oldest child, so there's a combination of reasons for this because, every child is different. And, and so, they all have different needs, but like she never really was on social media. I didn't encourage it, but she wasn't begging to be on it either. And so I didn't push it. And so I think, and you see a lot of the research coming out here, which has been in the research community, but now on a broad scale, like the recent, revelations about Facebook's internal studies, to their credit, they are doing research. They're actually studying it. So that's great. But unfortunately, the findings are, that Instagram is encouraging, young teens to be more depressed or, think more suicidal thoughts. I mean, that's pretty serious. And so I think for me, I have to tailor it to the child. And unfortunately, my oldest was not, super into it, but we definitely set ground rules and said, hey, until you're a certain age, you won't even have this account. And I think by that time, she just wasn't even interested. Like Facebook obviously is old person technology, right? And so by that point, I think she wasn't even interested in getting on. So, and then I know, I think my youngest will definitely, she's super social. So I think she's going to be the one that we're going to, have to tailor this. But I think definitely I've learned, I have great colleagues doing research in this area, but number one, I do know that a lot of these technologies, even for adults, right, have negative ramifications, are addictive, and that varies person to person. I think that's a really important thing to emphasize, which is it may not be a problem for you or a certain person, but it may be very hard for another person, right? We all have very different personalities. And if you even just look at the addiction literature, people have different predispositions to be addicted to either a substance or to gambling or to, certain content. I think, with pornography, right, they talk about that, where there's certain people, or cigarettes, right? You have one and then you're addicted for life, versus other people might not do anything. So I think, having a tailored approach is really important. And I think also making expectations really clear up front. I think a lot of parents, especially, my generation and maybe even your generation, parents were kind of like, okay, go and use this technology, go and, and they didn't know much about it or what was possible. Like, I just think about when I was younger and I'm like, I'm in chat rooms, talking to random people, like, like as a parent, I'm like, oh my goodness, like, like my parents, I wish they knew so they could stop me. Right. Not that anything bad happened, but like you just have all sorts of, there aren't any safeguards, and technology is designed to basically be, it's an open-ended tool. And the problem with that is it's so open-ended that you can do almost anything. You can do a lot of good. You can also do a lot of bad. And, teenagers, a lot of the research shows, like those of you working in psychology and sociology, their developmental stage is very different, and the way they think is very different. So an adult, like in the privacy research, if you warn them about potential risks or privacy issues or consequences that can happen, that usually is enough to, to some extent, change their behaviors, to make them more aware or more cautious. However, for teenagers, that doesn't work. Telling them that something, and any of you who are around teenagers, like I've been working with youth for a lot of years, and you tell them that something could be dangerous or it could be risky, and it doesn't actually connect to their actual behavior, right? At least they don't really take into account. And so a lot of the research shows that a lot of times teens will learn through making small mistakes. They'll go and they'll do something, or they have to actually try it out to learn, right? It's like learning by doing as opposed to by being told. And because of that, I think, a lot of it could be, you could completely restrict social media, but I think to best teach them sometimes, if they're interested in social media, help them get on, be a part of that, be a partner in their usage. Hopefully you can develop a relationship where, I know some, teens are going to be like, oh, I don't want my mom on my, Instagram or whatever. Right. But then a lot of them are actually open to it, especially if you start with them young. A lot of the research that's going on in that area are starting to look at when they're very young. If you start out with like a phone contract, you have to check it in at night, you use it in common areas, spelling out those rules. If you start really young, like elementary school, they will actually adapt to it. They will be okay to it. And in fact, when they're younger, they're much more open to these rules, right? They're used to having rules imposed on them, as opposed to when they're teenagers, they're already like, oh, you're giving me a new rule, like, wait a second here. But it's like, oh, well, that's just the way it's always been. If they've grown up with technology, with those rules, then I think it is a little easier for them to accept these rules. And also framing it as sort of using social media, using a phone as a privilege, as opposed to, a necessity, like a basic right, human right. I think that is an important framing as well, for them to know, because otherwise, they see everyone else around them using phones and using technology, and it's hard. So yeah, anyway, I could go off and on about that, but it definitely has affected how I approach it. And in fact, there's different philosophies on, there's monitoring software, there's software that allows you to restrict certain sites or ask them, have you them request sites from you whenever they want to go someplace. And those are all, in the toolbox for things that you can use, but I don't think there's a good solution right now, because every child's so different and will, need different boundaries. And also even if you were to use software, it's actually not foolproof. Like, a lot of kids, if they want to get around software, they can. Like, trust me, I talk to my youth all the time, and they're just like, oh yeah, you can get around that. It's not foolproof. So I think a lot of it comes back to trying to build that relationship and that expectation of, this is a privilege for you to use when they're young, and setting some rules and helping them understand why the rules are there. That's kind of the best practice that I've seen so far, but it's still a wide open area of research. So any other questions about specific aspects of grad school or work-life balance? I definitely have a lot of that going on all the time. Okay.
We've got one. How did you and your husband choose who would work and who would go to school? And how did you balance each other's priorities? Great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. So, when we first met, I was already in grad school and he was working. So, I was halfway through. So I finished out my degree, and then of course I was 8 months pregnant by the time I finished my degree. So, and then I also had no huge desire at that point to go to grad school. And since he wasn't done with his school, so he actually took a break from school for a little bit to run like a magazine and do all these like things that, were really cool opportunities. And then he was like, okay, it's time to go back and finish. So, so we kind of naturally just switched at that point so that he could finish school, and I went ahead and worked. And then, after that, it was more of a, like when I got my patriarchal blessing, I was actually halfway through my master's, and it said, you should reach out for a higher education. And so I thought I was done. I was like, oh, higher education, grad school, I'm going to be done in 4 months. I'm so on top of it, ahead of this patriarchal blessing thing. And so basically I went ahead and, did work and everything, but then had that experience where I just knew, oh, I need to go back to grad school. And so it's an interesting question, because for me, it actually, I feel like, was completely guided from the Lord. I ended up basically, I had finished my grad school 5 years. I took like a 5-year break when I was in industry and he was going to school. And of course, my GREs had just expired, because I took them to go, to get my master's, and then they only last 5 years. So for those of you who are taking a break between master's and PhD, or some sort of break somewhere else, be aware of that 5-year limit. And so they had just expired when I got the inspiration that I needed to go back to school. And I was like, oh, I have to study for the GREs and take standard, like I thought I was done with school. And so I basically did that. And again, I think there's divine intervention, because when I took my GREs, I was positive, like I ran out of time on the math section, and I had like 5 more questions. So I was randomly picking, like options at the very end. And and then they ask you, do you want to reject, do you want to throw these scores away? So they give you a last chance. So before it mars your record, right, you can get rid of your scores instead of accepting them. And I was like, oh, I really should discard this. Like I randomly guessed the last 5 and, who knows how. And I was like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to accept because I have to have these GREs to go back to grad school. And it was crazy. I ended up getting almost a perfect score on the math, which, like I said, I randomly guessed on the last 5. So, like I did not do that at all. And so I think, I was able to get in. I actually knew specifically what school I was supposed to go to. It was just a part of my patriarchal blessing flashed across my mind as I was at a conference, an academic conference, like listening to a talk. My field is very like academia and industry folks, like there's a lot of kind of crossover. So even though I was working in industry, I was at an academic conference, one of the top conferences for my field. And as I was watching a talk, it was somebody from UC Irvine giving a talk, and it was like a passage flashed in my mind. I was like, oh, I need to be at UC Irvine. And so I literally applied only to UC Irvine. And again, the Lord made it work out miraculously. And that's where I ended up going. So I just think, having things, these little things like having a patriarchal blessing, reading it every day. And I had read it every day so that I literally had it memorized so that passages could just literally pop to my mind. And those are very little things that I would never expect to make a difference. And yet that was how the Lord was able to indicate to me and guide to me to where I was supposed to be. And so again, I think my path was very directed, and even being here at BYU. So the quick story behind that is we felt really strongly a year before I was graduating from my doctorate that we need to be on the East Coast where my husband's from. So we basically decided to move. I wrote the last chapter, year of my degree I was doing remotely, and wrote my dissertation remotely, and unfunded. And I miraculously got some fellowships and funding that allowed that to happen, but we did this all before we knew it could work out. We just were like, okay, we need to be on the East Coast because we know we need to be there. And somehow it works out. And I feel like, again, it's back to, if you have the Spirit in your life, somehow it works out, or you're doing what you're supposed to do. And my husband didn't have a job. Of course, we're just randomly moving across the country, and no one wants to hire someone and relocate someone from California to, the East Coast. And so it was, I think 2 weeks before we were set to move, that he had a Skype interview and got hired through a Skype interview. And the guy was showing him around, like on his laptop, like, here's the office, here are the people, and it ended up being the town that we moved into, and a whole bunch of different experiences where we knew we were supposed to be there. And it just worked out, and it was amazing. And then, of course, we knew we were there because we were supposed to be there. But pretty soon after, I got a faculty job at Bentley. And by the way, that was also unplanned. There's so much here. So basically, we moved to the East Coast. Okay, I spent my last year on my dissertation there. Of course, I got pregnant and ended up having our third kid 2 months before I defended my dissertation. And so it was just a little crazy. And so I was pretty sure, I was like, okay, that I was accelerating my graduation, because I'm like, I'm doing this, and I've gotten funding for the past year, but I don't know how much more I can find external funding, because I can't be funded by my professor if I'm not living in California. And so I was like, okay, I need to finish this by December. And I was having a baby. She was born in October. And the third thing I needed to do was be on the job market. So the job market did not happen. The other two were prioritized. And it ended up being a huge blessing, because even though, fortunately my husband's working, so, we have a job, but, it's very expensive there. So, it's, most people have 2 people working there if you live in the Boston area. And, but I ended up being able to just really spend, 2 years with my little one on this unofficial sabbatical, because what happens is in the fall, you go and interview, and then they hire you for the next fall. So, that fall I had missed the hiring rounds. I was actually looking for a postdoc position at that point. I was also wondering, I'm like, my patriarchal blessing told me to get a doctorate. I really don't know what I'm doing with this. Like, I have no idea why I have one, but I have one now. What do I do? And so I started interviewing for postdoc positions because I had missed the job cycle for normal positions. And I interviewed at some of the top institutions in that area that will be unnamed. But, some of the first questions, or not first, but, halfway through the interview, some illegal questions were kind of like you have 3 kids. So how do you manage your time? And how much time do you have? And okay, so they do activities like how, like, are you going to have time in the evenings? Like, it was literally this probing of, you're a mom with 3 kids. Like, how are you going to actually, do this job? Which I understand, logistics of you need to be able to put in the amount of time, but the connection between being a mom and having 3 kids, that's actually an illegal connection to make and not something you're supposed to ask about. But anyway, so I was kind of bummed, and I was really like, there's these positions that sound really cool, but I'm basically not going to be able to get any of those because, I have 3 kids and I'm really busy, and they're not going to think I'm able to do it. And, but it ended up being a huge blessing because those probably were not the jobs I wanted anyway, right? The ones that just kind of superficially value you. I'm like, look at my track record, look at all my publications. Like, who cares? Like, if I'm a mom of 3 kids, but I have all these top publications, like, that's really what you should care about, right? And Bentley was the first place where, like, I went and they were like, oh, you have 3 kids? I have 2 kids, blah, blah, blah. And it was like a normal conversation. I was like, okay, like, this is where I should be. And of course, right before I got the job, I literally had the thought come into my mind, you will be at Bentley. So I knew I was going to be there. And so I ended up taking a tenure track job there, which I had never planned out. But, it ended up being the right thing and a great fit. But then pretty soon after I started at Bentley, I had a dream that in 5 years, I was going to have to make a decision between being at Bentley, which is, a fantastic fit in terms of work-life balance. I loved my colleagues. They were, everyone was super nice, got along well. And I was able to work from home most of the time and just go in for teaching. It's a business university, so the dynamic's a little different than, some of the other disciplines. It's a lot more flexible, but and in my dream, I was gonna have to make a decision between that, which was the choice that would make a lot of sense from the worldly perspective and, in every way possible, and the right choice. And I didn't know what that right choice was in my dream at all. And then I told my husband about this. And then at the end of the week, the bishop walked up to my husband and said, are you guys moving? And he's like, no. He's like, I had a dream that Xinru was packing up her office at Bentley and moving. And I was like, what? Because I have, funny dreams sometimes, but I'm like, my bishop had a dream that we were moving the same week. And so I knew, even though I had just started at Bentley and it seemed like a perfect fit, that in 5 years, I was going to have to make a decision. And that brings me to why I'm here at BYU. I basically realized in the beginning of my 5th year, I actually took my daughter out for EFY, and just a whole bunch of different things happened. I ended up meeting people in the computer science department and just talking to folks. And, I just knew this is the right choice. This is where I was supposed to be. So long version of who decided where. We did not decide a single segment of this, like who's going to school and who is working. It was literally every single time, like, you should be here. And I'm not saying that everyone will have that experience. Like we learn, everybody has a different path and a different way of feeling the spirit. But for me, I can testify that I obviously have moved to a whole bunch of places every single time because we knew we were supposed to be there, not because of any kind of practical consideration. In fact, anyone from the outside, all my colleagues, when I told them I was leaving Bentley, were like, this is before the pandemic too. I accepted the job before the pandemic, and they're just like, your 5th year, because usually your 6th year, you go up for tenure, and then you have job security. And if you have job security and then you apply to a school, you're in a much better position to negotiate. And, you can go over with a higher salary, maybe with tenure, so this is just crazy. And I had no indication, all indications were positive. I'm positive I would have gotten tenure at Bentley. So, it wasn't like I'm leaving because things are bad. but then the pandemic hit, and now I'm like, wow, okay. And I think there's more than just the pandemic that has to do with it. I think we really are supposed to be here. And I kind of feel like I'm on a mission, being here at BYU. It's been amazing. But I think I'm like, wow, my kids can play sports. They can do all sorts of things. Whereas Massachusetts is one of the most closed down areas, I'd say, in the country. And, they didn't have any sports seasons. They didn't, kids were going to school still twice a week, half day, it was just very different. And so at least for my family, it's been I think a blessing in that sense. Okay, so manage money intelligently on a grad student stipend. Yes, it's that's always tricky, and especially I went from industry back to a grad school, so it was definitely a pay cut. I did not go back none of my moves have been financially motivated. They've been pretty much the opposite. But yeah, it's one of those things where I think you learned, like I used to be very, like I knew exactly what store had what sales and what items. I had a list, went to 3 different stores, bought, the things that are on sale. So I think, you have to be kind of thrifty when you're on a student stipend, but you make things work. And I think you also have a great community, especially here at BYU. It sounds like there's so many wonderful activities involving kids, like Jordan, you're just saying the recent graduate student fair that had some kids activities. I think Utah is definitely at the top of my list for places that are actually super kid friendly and the best place to be a poor grad student, I think. So I've lived in some expensive cities. So Irvine was in Orange County, Southern California, and Boston area. Those are kind of the higher end price points. And so not the recommended places to live when you're a poor grad student, but you can still do it. Obviously, I did it. And also I have the advantage that my husband was actually able to work. Again, in those places, only one person working is also still, you're still like at that, lower rung there of being able to afford much. But we did fine. And so I think it really is just, sometimes you go through different seasons in life and you do have to skimp and sacrifice a little more. But, I think another thing is your advisors, like, I didn't realize how much work they put into finding funding. Like and that's why now, like, I put so much work into grant writing and finding funds, because it is hard to, get enough money, and you want to support your grad students and you want to support as many as you can. But, I think a lot of times talk to your advisors, talk to them about your situation, your needs, because that's important. And I had a fantastic advisor who found I got a much higher stipend. And I had a fellowship that was like one of the college fellowships, like a dean's fellowship, that ended up allowing me to have more money than a typical student. But my advisor knew that number one, I was coming from industry. I had 2 kids and a family, and he was kind of like, okay, she probably needs a little more, which was true, So I think, that's one thing. You can always be transparent. And sometimes, it is hard to find money, but having that conversation with your advisor, I think that is really valuable, just being transparent. And that way they're aware, because sometimes they don't even know, right? Like I anticipate that my students all have financial need, but if I know one of them has more financial need, right, then I might look into more opportunities. There's a lot of fellowships you can apply for. That's how I funded my last year of school. And you can definitely look for external funding as well on your own, not even just through your advisor, just a lot of graduate student fellowship type programs that you can apply for. So, okay. And yes, I'll tackle, we have 5 minutes. So I'll tackle like a last question here. Your experience being a mom and doing school at the same time. Okay. Start having kids while both you and your, okay. It's so funny, because I think the theme of today is that Heavenly Father planned some of these major benchmarks in my life. And I kind of just went with it. Our first was unexpected. Our third was also unexpected. And so I had children and just made it work. And I think, a lot of it just ends up being you're never really ready. And I know a lot of people tell you, say that, and especially in academia, actually, I think this is super important for you all to hear, which is, I have a lot of colleagues who are like, okay, I'm going to wait until I get tenure, then I'm going to have kids, or I'm going to wait until this happens. And you know what, like, it actually just gets busier, honestly. That's the secret. Like when I was a grad student, now I'm thinking, oh, I had so much free time when I was a grad student, I was able to go out and do things, and you know, like I was in charge of my one research project for my thesis, or my couple research projects for my thesis. You know, then you become a faculty member, and then you're like, oh my goodness, not only am I teaching 2 classes, I have like, you know, I have 8 research projects going on in my lab with students, and I have to, you know, make sure they're all going and running. And now I have to look for funding, and like, it's not to scare you all, you can do it. It's manageable. It's sort of like, you know, when you have no kids, that jump between no kids to a kid is huge. And then when you have 1 kid to 2 kids is huge. And then 2 to 3, right? It just goes exponentially, but you grow into it. And so I think, you know, in terms of kids, there's never a great time to like stop and be like, I'm ready to have kids. And in fact, the sooner you have them, probably the better, because I have to say, being able to, you know, like spend time with my kids, because classes are flexible, right? It's not like a 9-to-5 job where you have to be gone like a full day. I mean, it depends on your field, but most academic fields, you don't have to be in the lab like all day, every day, you know, 5 days a week. And so I loved being able to actually be at home. I kind of felt like I was able to balance both. I was able to be at home and, you know, pick them up after school, hang out with them, do the fun things, birthday parties, play dates, right? But, you know, I also had a lot going on that I had to get done while they're napping, or, you know, like after they go to bed at night. I have some optimal work hours then that I still do now, because, you know, that's just how it is. And so I would encourage you to just not make that the factor, because it just gets busier. And so having doing it now, actually, I would even say, is a huge blessing. It was for me to be able to spend time with them.
Awesome. Thank you so much.